Look at it. Look, I'm from Southside Jamaica, Queens. I don't like Supreme. I don't like premium, but he lived the way.
I'm a passionate brother. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I cry a lot of shit like that. I'm very emotional. So when people talk about me,
He wanted that. He was watching them be that, like Mace be that and Camp be that.
Why would a casual line in an interview turn into the kind of trouble you don't walk away from? That's the question everyone felt the second those words landed. Listen closely. This isn't petty noise. It's a deliberate prod. A man from Queens says something about a Harlem figure, and suddenly an old ledger flickers back to life. Short sentences, clear stakes. He says he wears his heart on his sleeve. He admits he gets emotional. He says he'll stand up for himself. Those are small lines with heavy consequences. When you name-check a heavyweight in this culture, you're not just trading words. You're poking at a history. You're testing a long memory. And in this system, memories don't die. They get archived. They get weaponized. He spoke with feeling. The feeling landed. The crowd didn't just hear it. They felt it. A low, collective intake of breath. So what happens next? A reaction, but not the obvious kind. Not a loud rebuttal or a public screaming match. This was the opening move in a game with rules most people don't want to learn the hard way. The air tightened, and somewhere, someone who doesn't forget took notice.
I'm a passionate brother. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I cry a lot of shit like that. I'm very emotional. So when people talk about me, I got to stand up for me because nobody else going to stand up for me, as you see. You heard? I fight all my battles on my own. I take losses and I take my wins the same way. You heard? The same smirk, just like this.
In this culture, the rules aren't printed anywhere. They're passed down through whispers, scars, and stories told in back rooms after the cameras are gone. There's no handbook, only memory, respect, and fear. And one of the oldest lessons in that book is simple. You don't test 50 Cent unless you're ready for a war that doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling, because 50 isn't built like the others. His entire career is a masterclass in retaliation. He doesn't let things slide. He doesn't forgive. He strategizes. He listens. He watches. And then he moves, quietly, with precision. The man has made an art form out of payback, turning every insult into a business opportunity, every enemy into an exhibit. So when Jim Jones started speaking recklessly, even without saying the name, the message was clear, and so was the consequence. The kind of energy he summoned doesn't stay contained. It travels. It builds. It finds its way to the one man in this industry who knows how to make silence feel like a threat. And that's where this story starts to twist. Because when 50 Cent decides to respond, it's never about noise. It's about control.
Yeah, but at that point he was hating them. So it's like, you done robbed the brother for all the work they actually got. Now after you done robbed them for all the work they got, these two guys keep bringing new product over there for them to have work on the corner that you just robbed all the work that they had from. So now you're starting to allow him to try and develop his clientele back with that. So now what we got to do is we got to go rob them other two corners too. The other two guys keep giving it to him, we got to take that too. So now that they don't have anything to actually give him, to loan him.
2 decades of documented chaos. That's what 50 Cent brings with him. A trail of careers burned down to ash and reputations that never recovered. Every rapper knows the pattern. First comes the shade, then comes the silence, and right after that, the storm. And yet somehow, Jim Jones stepped into that cycle like he'd never seen it before. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was momentum, or maybe Harlem confidence just met Queen's calculation and didn't realize how different those two energies really are. What started as a whisper, a few slick, off-handed words, carried weight far beyond the microphone. In hip-hop, indirect shade is never really indirect. It's coded, but everyone who speaks the language understands exactly what's being said. And when Jim threw his subtle jab, the internet translated it instantly. The whispers became echoes. The echoes became headlines. Within hours, the name 50 Cent was hovering over the conversation like a storm cloud. Because when someone with that kind of history even senses disrespect, the question isn't if he'll respond, it's how he'll respond and who's still standing when he does.
Look at it. Look, I'm from Southside Jamaica, Queens. I don't like Supreme. I don't like premium. But he lived the way he actually projected himself. His lifestyle is consistent.
He was true to it.
He never ratted on nobody. Just like that.
Silence hits different when it comes from a man like 50. It's not calm, it's calculation. The absence of noise becomes its own kind of warning, like the quiet before a detonation. When 50 goes quiet, people start checking their phones, watching their mentions, wondering if they're next. That's how deep his influence runs. Because 50's silence isn't retreat, it's reconnaissance. He studies, he measures, he gathers receipts. He lets the tension cook just long enough for everyone else to feel comfortable. And then he flips the table. Every word, every post, every smirk he drops afterward feels surgical, like it was drafted in a war room. So when Jim started talking, and 50 didn't immediately react, that silence wasn't mercy. It was math. It was him deciding the right time, the right angle, the right moment to strike. And when it finally came, it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be devastating. Because that's 50's true weapon, not volume but patience. The ability to make a man destroy himself while thinking he's still in control.
I'm a passionate brother. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I cry a lot of shit like that. I'm very emotional. So when people talk about me, I gotta stand up for me because nobody else gonna stand up for me, as you see. You heard? I fight all my battles on my own. I take losses and I take my wins the same way. You heard? The same smirk, just like this.
That's the first mistake most people make when they find themselves in the 50's orbit, confusing quiet for disinterest. They think the man's moved on, that maybe he's got bigger targets, more important plays. But the truth is, 50's the kind of predator who hunts with patience. He doesn't chase noise. He studies movement. Jim thought the coast was clear. He went back to interviews, back to smiling on live, back to playing the role of Harlem's unbothered king. But beneath all that confidence, there was a current building, slow, invisible, deliberate. Because when 50 goes silent, that's when the work begins. The calls start. The alliances shift. The receipts pile up in folders no one ever sees until it's too late. And while Jim was talking like nothing had changed, the narrative was already being written without him. Posts were archived. Clips were resurfaced. His every word started to look different under the light of 50's history. It's not that 50 reacts, it's that he reframes. He doesn't argue with you. He lets time, context, and your own words do the talking. By the time you realize what's happening, your reputation is the one on trial.
Rappers have done a tremendous job, and I take nothing away from them, but they forget I got a hell of a catalog. Me, Jim Jones, myself, gold records, platinum records, gold albums, platinum albums. No, me, Jim Jones. No diplomats, no nobody else. Me, Jim Jones. Check my track record, then check everybody else's track record.
Once the internet starts digging, it's already too late to control the narrative. Old moments suddenly feel new again. Clips that once felt harmless now sound like evidence. And every smirk, every joke, every offhand comment, it all starts to look like foreshadowing. That's how 50 plays his game. He doesn't need to post anything himself. He just lights the spark and watches the internet burn for him. Because that's his real power, manipulation through momentum. For Jim, this wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a slow-motion character assassination, done without a single direct call-out. His past words began to work against him. Things he said years ago were being flipped, dissected, and fed back to the audience like hidden messages. That's what makes 50 dangerous. He's mastered the echo. He knows that perception moves faster than truth, and when perception turns, even your silence starts to look like guilt. And while Jim was out in public, laughing it off, the walls online were already closing in. Every algorithm, every comment section, every headline was pointing toward one question. Did Jim just underestimate the wrong man?
Period. I'd never take that away from him. But then as I got in the game, you got to realize that your rivals would be idols, and not to take anything away from that. I developed my own style and my own lane that these kids start to gravitate towards the same way I gravitated towards Nas when I was younger and things like that. It's a whole different generation. We're talking about 94. 93, I was in 11th grade. Nigga, it's 2025.
There's a specific kind of silence that makes people nervous, and 50 knows how to weaponize it. When he goes quiet, it's not peace, it's pressure. It's that eerie calm before the storm that everyone in this industry has learned to recognize. The man's built a legacy out of controlled chaos. He doesn't move until the timing feels perfect. He's the type to let you feel safe, let the blogs move on, and then he hits you with a play that rewrites the whole narrative in one move. And right now, that's exactly where Jim found himself, suspended in that limbo where nothing's being said, but everyone knows something's being planned. The kind of waiting game where your own mind starts turning on you. People close to the situation started whispering, not about beef, but about power, about who really had the leverage behind the scenes. And that's when things started to get uncomfortable. Because when 50's quiet, it usually means he's setting the stage for something bigger. Not just an argument, but a statement. The industry could feel it. The blogs could feel it. And deep down, so could Jim.
He really put the whole dope boy rap, crack hustler, get fresh rap into perspective before anybody else, before I heard Jay do it, before I heard anybody else. Like, he changed the cadence of rap into a whole different steam. Like, he's the one that broke the camel's back when it came to artists, like, to me, when it came to artists like Big Daddy Kane and all these artists that came right before him. Like, after Nas came with that, they started to fade out.
That's how it always happens. Not through fresh controversy, but through resurfaced truth. A clip from the past suddenly feels alive again, revived by timing and intent. And in this game, timing is everything. The footage didn't show violence or drama. It showed honesty, the kind that hits different when the stakes are higher. Jim talking with emotion, talking about loyalty, about street codes, about what separates real ones from opportunists. But when that kind of clip reappears during tension, people start connecting dots that maybe weren't even there. They start reading between the lines, drawing meaning from tone, from energy, from words said years ago. The thing about the internet, it doesn't care about context. It only cares about patterns. And this clip, in the hands of the right audience, started to feel like a confession. Like Jim had said something years ago that now sounded like a warning. Within hours, the conversation changed. It wasn't about a rumor anymore. It was about history repeating itself. And in a way, that made the silence even louder, because if this was the clip that came back to haunt him, what else was waiting in the archives?
He wanted that. He was watching them be that, like Mace be that and Cam be that, and looked at, and it was finally, he had one. Mm-hmm. And I just looked, and I knew, I just took the shot, Murder, to see, because I wasn't sure he was going to go for it. Mm-hmm. But I was like, we like Jimmy better than you anyway, Cam.
Once the audience turns from watching to investigating, the story's no longer yours to control, and Jim was learning that the hard way. The clip had become a puzzle piece, and everyone wanted to be the one to solve it. Threads popped up breaking down tone, facial expressions, word choice, even the pauses. Some said he was exposing something deeper about the industry. Others claimed he was taking subtle shots at people still powerful today. That's the danger of context. Once people decide you meant something, there's no convincing them otherwise. And when an audience that big starts drawing their own conclusions, it spreads faster than truth ever could. Jim didn't respond at first. Maybe he thought it would fade. But silence again became his enemy. Because the more he said nothing, the more people believed they were right. They filled in the blanks with imagination, and imagination always makes the story worse. And through it all, 50 remained silent, like a chess player watching his opponent make the first bad move. Because the best revenge isn't confrontation, it's patience. And that patience was finally starting to pay off.
Yeah, man, you know, like with me, I'm chasing chicken. You know, people tend to put rappers, quote-unquote rappers, in a box, and me, I'm just always chasing the check, you know what I'm saying? As long as I ain't doing nothing to, you know, damage my integrity, anything like that, I'm going to chase a check. If they tell me it's 500,000 and...
When 50 finally speaks after weeks of silence, it never feels random. It's a move with precision, short, sharp, and guaranteed to echo. That one caption didn't mention Jim by name, didn't even reference the drama directly, but the timing, the tone, it was surgical. He posted a photo that looked innocent enough, something from the past, something nostalgic. But the caption beneath it carried that classic 50 energy, cold humor mixed with truth only insiders fully catch. It was a reminder that he never forgets, he never forgives, he just waits until the world is watching again. Fans and industry heads alike knew exactly what it meant. They'd seen this play before, subtle shade that hits harder than any diss track. Because in the language of power, silence followed by symbolism speaks louder than 1,000 words. Jim might have laughed it off publicly, but the subtext was undeniable. That post wasn't just a jab, it was a warning. A signal that 50 had stepped back into the game, ready to remind everyone who controls the narrative when things start spinning out of hand. And as that post spread, one question started flooding through comment sections and group chats alike. Was this just trolling, or the start of something bigger?
Hey, bro, you been at this thing, but lyrically, I'm gonna keep it a stack with you.
Yeah,
y'all
but look how you
with
dress. Look how you dress. You don't even be in the same places I be in. The
But
things that we, listen to
I
me,
can
the
be in the
thing-
church
the-
house.
the-
You can't
the-
F with Nas
the
lyrics.
things that we- the
I don't know
things
who
that
told
we-
you that. Now look,
the
I
things
know you on that
things
good
that we
stuff,
listen
but
to
you're
and the
not
things that
seeing
you listen
Nas.
to. Bro,
You're
it's a
not
bunch of
seeing
40
Nas, bro.
You got a bunch
Let's
of
be
40 and
real.
50 You got a bunch of 40 and 50-year-olds in their panties because I said I'm better
It
than
don't
Nas.
matter.
Look at you. Look at you.
Nobody,
All in your,
ain't
all in
nobody
your
from
film.
Dipset gonna take you.
That single post from 50 flipped the whole temperature overnight. One moment, the story was cooling off. The next, it was wildfire again. Because when 50 moves, people follow. His words, or lack of them, carry that kind of weight in hip-hop. Not because he's louder, but because his timing is flawless. The blogs went crazy. Screenshots flooded timelines. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Some said Jim should clap back immediately, reclaim the narrative. Others said it was already too late, that 50 had done what he always does, bait the opposition into playing his game. And that's the thing about his game. It's psychological. He doesn't just want you to respond, he wants you to respond wrong, to act emotional, to slip, to turn your own image into ammunition he can use later. It's never just a post, it's a setup. By the time people realize they're playing into it, he's already on the next move. And that's what made everyone nervous. Because if 50 had just re-entered the conversation, it meant the chessboard was reset. Every silence, every rumor, every clip now had new meaning. This wasn't about clout anymore. It was about control.
And other things like that.
I've heard you say that.
Since the barbecue and things like that, like he really put the whole dope boy rap, crack hustler, get fresh rap into perspective before anybody else. Before I heard Jay do it, before I heard anybody else, like he changed the cadence of rap into a whole different steam. Like he's the one that broke the camel's back when it came to artists like, to me, when it came to artists like Big Daddy Kane and all these artists that came right before him. Like after Nas came with that, they started to fade out, and then
That was Jim's move, subtle, coded, but unmistakable. A street man's way of saying, I hear you. No Instagram post, no interview rant, just bars, raw, emotional, and layered with double meanings. But here's the truth. When tension's this public, even poetry gets dissected like evidence. Within minutes, fans were pulling up lyrics, trying to decode every line. Was it a response, a denial, or just him reclaiming his space in the conversation? The freestyle had that Harlem energy, proud, unbothered, but with a shadow of something deeper underneath, because you could hear it in his tone, frustration disguised as confidence, the kind of tone that says, I'm not worried, but the eyes tell a different story. And that's what makes these moments powerful, the duality. On one hand, he's performing. On the other, he's defending something real, his reputation, his code, his truth. 50 didn't reply directly, of course. He never does right away. He lets the world react for him, because in the end, every time Jim speaks, 50 doesn't have to. The internet does it for him, dissecting, quoting, comparing, turning every lyric into content, every line into leverage. The silence after that freestyle wasn't peace, it was calculation.
Social media talked about it. He did it. And I'm the only one who's been vocal about this long before it actually.
Oh, you've been saying this for a long time now. And then no one was, they're just, why is he saying this? And now it's coming out like crazy. I mean,
But I also didn't participate. I also didn't go to those parties.
That was the checkmate energy. 50 didn't need to say a word. The song said it all. Many Men isn't just music for him, it's prophecy. A reminder of what happens to those who challenge his name and forget how long his memory runs. When he posted that clip, it wasn't nostalgia, it was strategy. Every lyric suddenly hit different in the middle of all this tension. Fans flooded the comments, reading between every line, connecting dots that weren't even visible yet. It's that psychological warfare he's famous for. He doesn't argue, he implies. He doesn't shout, he reminds you who he is. Every move is crafted to keep the other side off balance. And the beauty of it, he never has to mention a name. The internet ate it up. Some laughed, some called it petty. But those who know 50's patterns, the real insiders, they knew what it meant. It was a public warning delivered in the most poetic way possible. For Jim, this was no longer about pride or lyrics. It was about survival, not physical, but narrative. Because once 50 turns your story into his art, it stops being yours. It becomes a verse, a moment, a memory controlled by someone else. And that's the kind of power few ever come back from.
You look like you need help. Tell your man 50 send you an ounce of something, yo.
You do need
You
that
might
help.
need
That's
2
why-
ounces.
That's why
Paid in full movie. I got a G for every bump in your face. I promise you that.
That's the thing about these feuds. They never stay on the surface. What starts as subliminals turns into a culture moment, a mirror reflecting everything this industry runs on: ego, memory, and control. At this stage, it wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about perception. 50 had turned silence into power, and Jim was fighting to prove that he could stand on his own name without folding under that pressure. Behind closed doors, insiders whispered that calls were being made, promoters, executives, even mutual connections trying to calm it down before it got too loud, because the last thing anyone in power wants is two heavyweights turning private tension into public chaos. But that's the beauty and danger of legacy beef. It's not about who's trending, it's about who lasts. Both men built their careers on resilience, on surviving eras most couldn't, so neither could afford to look like they blinked first. In the end, this wasn't just about one post or one freestyle. It was about the art of control, the way silence can move louder than sound, and how in hip-hop, timing is the real weapon. And if you've been around long enough, you already know, when 50 and Jim cross paths again, it won't be random, it'll be personal, and it'll be calculated. Because this story, it's not over, it's just waiting for the next spark. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the air was already charged. Even without new posts or interviews, the tension felt almost tangible, like the kind you could slice with a knife. Every glance on camera, every offhand remark in interviews, every subtle movement in the streets was being read like a coded message. The internet was alive with speculation, but the real game wasn't online. It was behind the scenes, in the offices, the studios, the quiet corners of New York, where the old rules of respect and power still mattered. People were asking the same question over and over: what was Jim going to do next? And the answer was complicated, because this wasn't a simple clash of egos. This was a collision of legacy, influence, and history. Jim Jones, for all his swagger and Harlem pride, was suddenly being measured against a man whose career had been carved out of survival, strategy, and the kind of calculated ruthlessness that could turn the tables on anyone. The comparison wasn't flattering, and deep down, Jim knew it. But there's a fine line between acknowledgement and action, and Jim had spent decades cultivating the perception of fearlessness. The man who could hold his own, the voice of the streets who always spoke his mind. Pulling back, staying quiet, wasn't his nature. So he did what he always did. He leaned into the narrative, trying to reclaim control on his own terms. It started small, subtle Instagram stories, ambiguous interviews, appearances that hinted at strength without tipping the hand too much. But every time he moved, he was aware, consciously or not, that 50 was watching. Every post could be dissected, every tone could be twisted, every silence could be weaponized. And that's the genius of 50. He doesn't need to be present to dominate the conversation. His absence is the signal, his patience is the pressure. Meanwhile, the industry began to feel the ripple effects. Radio hosts mentioned it in passing, blogs rehashed the timeline of old disputes, and even other rappers started distancing themselves slightly, careful not to get caught in the crossfire. In hip-hop, proximity to a storm can be just as dangerous as being the target, and everyone who understood 50's methods knew he wasn't bluffing. This wasn't performative drama, this was strategy. As the hours turned into days, the tension took on a new dimension. Jim wasn't just being measured in public perception, he was being assessed against the weight of history itself. Every move, every lyric, every appearance was compared to decades of precedent, to moments where others had underestimated 50 and paid the price, and that history is long, detailed, and brutally unforgiving. Then, whispers started circulating about what was happening behind the cameras: meetings, calls, quiet phone conversations between executives, managers, and mutual connections. Everyone was trying to read the energy, trying to determine if this would escalate into headlines or stay contained as a tense but controlled moment in music history. The game had shifted from the microphone to the boardroom, from the stage to strategy, and the one constant was 50's looming presence, silent, calculating, omnipresent. At the same time, Jim's camp tried to project calm. Public statements were carefully worded. Social media posts were curated for optics. But even in control, there was the unmistakable weight of pressure. Because in this environment, even mastery of image isn't enough. Timing, perception, and subtlety all count, and one misstep could flip the narrative in an instant. fans, bloggers, and commentators started drawing comparisons between Jim's past and present. Clips from early 2000s performances reemerged. Interviews that once seemed innocuous were suddenly scrutinized. Every line, every gesture, every tone of voice was examined for evidence of intent, confidence, or weakness. And as people dug, the lines between performance, persona, and reality blurred. Jim's words, the ones meant to project strength, were now being interpreted as signs of stress. And yet, he persisted. He continued to put himself out there in subtle ways, reinforcing his relevance, reminding people of his catalog, his contributions, his legacy. He reminded everyone that while 50's shadow was long, he himself had a history of influence that could not be erased. But it was a dangerous balance, asserting presence without inviting confrontation, because one wrong move, one misjudged post, and 50 could turn that history into a weapon. Meanwhile, 50's approach remained surgical. There were no fiery videos, no aggressive posts, no public denouncements, just the slow accumulation of context, the resurfacing of past moments, the calculated silence. And that, in itself, was enough to make the world hold its breath. Every observer knew the rules. When 50 acts, it isn't reactive, it's proactive. Every choice is a calculated step, every post a piece of a much larger plan. The tension became almost cinematic. You could feel it in the way the streets talked, in the hushed tones of radio interviews, in the sharp analysis of social media threads. It was as if everyone was collectively leaning forward, waiting to see how the next move would land. And the stakes were bigger than just two men's reputations. This was a lesson in influence, in control, and in the invisible hierarchy that still governs the game. Then came a moment that caught everyone off guard. Jim appeared at an event, casual, confident, smiling, but there was a subtle message in his demeanor. Every gesture, every glance, every interaction seemed to be a calculated display of composure. He was saying without words, "I'm still here, I'm still relevant, and I can navigate this." But even in public, the tension was palpable, because everyone knew the other player wasn't visible, but was always watching. In this world, presence alone isn't power, perception is. And the narrative wasn't just about who spoke louder, it was about who controlled the tempo, who dictated the rhythm of attention. And in that, 50 still had the upper hand. Every silence, every pause, every calculated absence strengthened the gravity of his influence. Jim could show up, he could perform, he could assert, but he was playing in someone else's orbit. And as the hours stretched, the story continued to evolve in ways nobody could fully predict. Each interaction, each new observation, fed into the larger tapestry, the ongoing drama between legacy, ego, and survival. It was an unspoken contest of wills, a dance of strategy and restraint, where every move was scrutinized and every reaction amplified. For viewers, for fans, for the industry, it became more than a feud. It became a lesson in timing, in history, in the subtle art of dominance. It showed that in hip-hop, power isn't always about who yells the loudest. Sometimes it's about who waits, who watches, and who knows that silence can speak louder than words. And as this chapter unfolded, one truth became clear. Nothing about this is random, nothing is casual, and nothing is permanent. The story would continue, and every player involved understood that the next move could redefine everything. And don't go anywhere. Click the next video you see on your screen for even more juicy celebrity chaos, betrayals, and stories Hollywood doesn't want you to know. See you in the next one.